This video is brought to you by TS4U IT Engineering Bootcamp.
Question I have, probably I think you have experienced a lot of with Kubernetes. I think I have a silly question, probably. So what is your experience with init dash container?
Okay, yeah. So we basically use init containers a lot because of our backend, mostly for our backends. And another way we basically do it is we use the vault. Okay, so for those, like both of these cases, we basically have to use the init container. So let me just explain it to you. So based on our like system. So what we have is our backend actually has a migration system. Okay, so we don't run our database migrations manually. It always happens as like automatically. Okay, so whenever we have a migration to run, for that migration, we have a small image with our like migration scripts, and that we basically run as an init container whenever we actually try to deploy some application or our deployment actually, or whenever we roll out our deployment, it basically runs. So the init container runs only once, right? So that was a perfect fit for our use cases, because as soon as our backend actually starts to kick in, it needs to check that if it has a pending migration to run on the database. Okay, and our migration script ensures that, okay, it checks on the DB, it checks on the system for the updated migration files, and if we have a like migration to run, it will just run the like update migration script. So that is a shell file, okay, with a bunch of commands and everything. Previously we used to do it manually, but after that we used init container to automate it. So whenever we actually like start the deployment or like increase the number of replicas for the backend, the init container kicks in first. It checks and runs, if necessary, the migration, and then it basically runs the actual container, that is the backend container, and then the backend container just connects to the database and it just works. So that's one way we use the init containers, and the second one is with the vault. Okay, so as we use the PostgreSQL database and the MySQL in some parts, so we use the like Postgres secret engine from the Vault. So Vault actually allows us to have dynamic credentials into like into our pods. Okay, so that we don't use a static username and password to connect to our database. So this actually increases the security as well, because like if a container is compromised, then the attacker will only get certain access to our database. They won't have the root access to our database. So it will save our data leak as well. Okay, so for that, Vault actually uses in its own way to inject the dynamic credentials to the application. Okay, so we don't need to configure it. Basically, we installed Vault as a Helm chart. Okay, so it actually like inserts an init container whenever our backend actually runs, and then it injects the credentials, the dynamic database credentials into the system, which are later read by the environment variable and used with the system. Okay, so these are the two cases we basically use the init containers.